Welcome to the Everyday Citizens Tactical Podcast, episode 38, a 2025 Outlook. My name is Jeremy, and as always, I will be your host. It's been a little while since we have put out a podcast, so today we're going to talk about a summary of 2024 and some of my individual thoughts on 2025. So sit back, relax, and let's have a conversation.
Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours. Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours.
What is going on, everybody? A long time no here. I probably haven't put out a podcast, I would say, since October. And I think the last one we did was on Hurricane Helene. And we had somebody on that lived in North Carolina to actually discuss, what was going on the ground in North Carolina. Just talked about the initial after effects of the disaster, so on and so forth. If I remember correctly, it was the Sicilian off of Instagram. And we're going to dive into Hurricane Helene and a ton of other stuff in this. There's no guest for today. There's no kind of real structure. It's just me kind of reaching back out and touching bases with all of you guys kind of in my absence from the podcast world. 2024 was... Oh man, 2024 was a busy year. Busy year. Where do I start? I guess for starters, most of you that follow my personal page on Instagram know that in August of 23, I went back to paramedic school. I was essentially kicked out the first time because I would not get vaccinated. That was in 2021, fall of 21. And they dropped the requirements in summer of 23. So I went back to paramedic school in fall of 23, and I finally finished that in August of this past year of 2024. And for those that don't know, paramedic school is a load. It is a very heavy course load. Just outside of your classroom, time itself, you have, clinical time in the hospital, in the ER, but then also your specialty clinicals. You have a ton of ambulance ride time. And like myself, I'm not a 19, 20-year-old kid with a part-time job still living at home. I'm a grown-ass adult, and just like a lot of other people that go to medical class, people that go to medical class that have kids, so there are other things in life, like working at the firehouse every third day on a normal basis, plus school, plus clinicals, plus ride time, plus trying to keep up on all of the other responsibilities in life. So paramedic school was a heavy load, and ECT kind of took a back seat a little bit through 2024. It's really interesting. Most people don't know, but in the beginning of summer of 2023, I kind of started moving my chips into the center, and I was going to put them all in on ECT. And I was like, well, if I can't go to paramedic school and kind of get that pay raise being a full-time fireman, I'm going to kind of diversify a little bit. I'm going to expand ECT. I was looking at opening up, a new store here in the Cincinnati tri-state, something that would be the first of its kind in this area, and expand classes and do all of this kind of stuff. But then they came knocking and they said, hey, the vaccine requirement has been dropped. You have the opportunity to go back. And I was like, man, it was one of those things where it was like now or never, because I knew I was getting married in a little over a year. Kids come next, and then, it gets harder and harder in life to, go back and be a full-time student. So I was like, regardless of what happens with ECT, ensuring I have this, essentially this pay bump and this skill increasement in my normal career was important. So went back to paramedic school, finished that August of 24. ECT took a bit of a backseat. I'm sure the slowdown in YouTube content and kind of rolling out of products and all that kind of stuff was pretty evident. So finished that in August of 24. I got married in October of 2024 to the absolute love of my life. It was a fantastic wedding. I could not have asked for a more perfect night. I don't have a single complaint. The weather was great. The party was great. The bride was beautiful. It was wonderful. It was wonderful all around. But about 2 weeks before I got married, And I'm sure my now wife she's very supportive, but I'm sure she was like, damn. Me and the local boys went down and tried to help with Hurricane Helene. That first weekend of October, right at that week after it had hit. We're 2 weeks leading up to the wedding. My wife's trying to sit down with me and talk about last minute discussions and do all this type of stuff, and I'm sitting here trying to plan how to take 25 plus guys to Tennessee with all this equipment and donations and op planning and calling people nonstop, and it was chaotic. It was so chaotic. And then, as most know that follow me on Instagram and whatnot, know that the Hurricane Helene response from my local guys' perspective. Sorry for that little notification ding that popped up on my computer. It was disappointing from the operational perspective. The donation side went very well. Us getting there, had its challenges, but went well. But the actual operations on the ground there and dealing with government and all that kind of stuff was very, very disappointing. We're going to dive into that in a little bit. But wrapping up 2024 from the ECT perspective, we refreshed, some of our products listed by HRT, because ECT is a HRT tactical dealer. And we kind of continued to build on the medical products and whatnot. But, there wasn't a whole lot of new stuff for 2024 for ECT. There just wasn't the time, there wasn't the money, there wasn't the resources, there wasn't the planning there. So that's kind of where all of that lies. Unfortunately, going into 2025, and it's very, very minor, but minor things add up. There's going to be slight price changes on some medical stuff and some just various things. It was getting laid on me all of 2024, just emails from our different dealers and suppliers and all that kind of stuff talking about price changes for 2025, and it was just like, people can't catch a break enough as it is, with as high as prices have got. And here at ECT on the website, like, I run prices really slim, slimmer than I definitely should. A business advisor would probably get on me about that, but there's just nothing I as a small business owner can do about it when I'm dealing with other people's products, and a lot of companies are facing that at this point. But that's kind of a wrap for 2024. Oh, I did go down, another fantastic thing. Went up to Pennsylvania for the HTA Range Day. Went and taught a communications class, 2-day communications class. That was really fun. Got to meet a lot of new people for that. Some people kind of just took it as a place filler. Some people took it and were just really, really into the comms portion. And, I have never claimed to be the comms expert. There are guys that are so much smarter than me. But I'm definitely, far above the average radio user, just due to all my experience in life dealing with comms, from the military and the fire service, but also just like the etiquette and the performance portion and, implementing comms, designing communications plans, so on and so forth. So there were some people that were really, really into the class, and all for a great cause. I've gone to HTA 2 years in a row, and then in 2022 to the Deliver Fund Range Day that my buddy Justin, Archangel Tactical Medicine, put on. So I'm glad to be a part of that event. Now that I think wraps up 2024 pretty well. Of course, we did some LSW, MSW content. Love my buddy Cody over at Red Right Hand. He's a big supporter of us. I'm a big supporter of him. He is killing it over there. Auto Rifleman is the future. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I kind of want to dive into the Hurricane Helene thing a little bit more, and I don't have a huge presentation or kind of notes built out on this, but it kind of was a big eye-opener for a lot of us. And for some more detailed context and everything, I would go back to the last episode we posted with the Sicilian. It's a little over an hour long, and we talk about it when it's kind of fresh in everybody's heads. But the big thing with Hurricane Helene, and it was kind of just like a, even bigger situation than the Hawaii fires the year prior, was that the government ruins everything it touches, guys. I mean, you really cannot rely on government. You cannot to any degree. And even to this day, all the people in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee they're not being helped by any means. You see all these stories about churches and NGOs and whatnot coming and building temporary housing or donating these tiny houses or these RVs and so on and so forth. And while every situation has its iffy moments and there's sometimes is some wrongdoings involved with things, for the most part, government is just getting in the way of helping these people. It seems like every single day. Now, it's not to say that everything government does is harmful or wrong or bad or anything like that. But, I read a story the other day about how several hundred homes, these tiny homes, were built by the Amish, paid for by this church community or whatever it was. And, some local building inspectors wouldn't let anybody move into them because they weren't, properly up to building spec, or they weren't approved prior to being built, so on and so forth. You've seen the same thing with, the fires in Hawaii, the year prior, where all of these people have lost everything and they're given next to nothing financially to compensate them in any way for these natural disasters. Insurance leaves them out to dry, and then the people are just left to fend for themselves. And you could go back and forth on it forever, but even with the civilian response during the initial disaster, yeah, there were some bad actors involved, some people that took advantages of the situation. You got to control it. But the audacity of these different levels of government to block these good Samaritans and these people who dropped everything in their life to go help others is mind-blowing to me. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me. I could talk about the Hurricane Helene and its effects and the other hurricanes' effects of last year for quite some time in my grievances, but we won't eat up the whole podcast. But as part of a 2024 recap, that's a big thing that I think still sits heavy with a lot of people. And it really, really just goes to show that locally organized, trained, professional volunteer groups, community volunteer groups, community response groups are huge. Because the only thing you have to really rely on is your local responders. If you have a good relationship with them and a good dynamic with them and they take their job serious. But if they're affected, if their firehouse is destroyed, swept down a river, destroyed by a tornado, carried off by Lord knows what, well, who's coming to help? There were times where down in, eastern Tennessee, you just see cop cars flipped up against trees or on their side or turned over in a ditch that's been laying there for a week or two or whatever. So I really think a lot of people are starting to see the importance of the organized community groups. And it's a lot of work. It takes time. It takes money. It's a financial commitment. It's a time commitment. Giving up an extra day or two a month, normally on the weekends, to go train with the guys and, buying equipment and, just doing all this kind of stuff. It adds up. It absolutely does. But it's so important when things happen. Because when things do happen and they go bad, they go poorly, you're thankful at the end of the day that you have those resources, you have that community to help. You really do. Moving along to the election, I think everybody knew Trump was going to win going into this election. It's no secret here. I am not a Trump fan by any means. I think there's a difference between a Trump voter and a Trump supporter. I think more people are Trump voters than they are Trump supporters. Even since he's been elected, he's been a bit of a, plainly put, childish in a sense about annexing Canada and Panama and Greenland and just all of this stuff, as if we don't have enough serious issues that we need to focus on. Elon Musk is not the answer. He's basically just blocked, deleted, banned everybody on Twitter who doesn't agree with them. I don't think this was the kind of savior group that a lot of people foolishly thinks that it was going to be, but it's better than, I think, a Kamala presidency for the most part. Now, we'll get into the economics of it in a little bit. I was going to discuss economics in a Trump presidency, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let me make a note of that right here. Economy. We're going to revisit that in a little bit. Put a little note on there. And then global destabilization, a big thing that's happened through 2024. I talked about it with a few of my buddies a few years ago, probably 2020, 2021. And it was when the third world, second world countries kind of started to get the rumblings and some destabilization was occurring and economies were kind of shaking a little bit. And I told everybody, I told all my friends, when it starts with the third world countries, it starts with these failed states that have all these problems, people really don't care. They think, that's a third world problem, not really any of our concern. And then it affects kind of the second and, kind of more bottom tier first world countries. And then it goes to the modern first world countries. And then eventually it builds to where it's first world country problems. And that's kind of where we are now. Through time, issues have built up more and more and more and more until now we're at this point where the entire world really seems like it's just on edge all of the time. So that's one thing. We've got issues, the continued issue in the Middle East. We've got the war in Ukraine that continues to go on, tensions with Taiwan and China, South Korea, the cartel issues to our southern border with tons of problems to even further south of us into Central America and South America. Not to mention the problems we have internally, both here in the U.S. and in Europe. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but 2024, not great. And even though the stock market somehow continues to do decently, the reality of this country's finances doesn't seem that way. I know people's dollars are tighter than ever. Grocery store prices continue to climb. Gas has come down a little bit, which has been nice compared to like 2022, 2023. Which I don't know how it has, considering nothing's gotten better anywhere near large oil producing countries. But I think it goes to show you that a lot of that is just a part of the game, and that it can kind of be manipulated by the powers to be. And I don't think $4.50 gas in the more moderate portions of the U.S., $7 or $8 for some of you California, New York, Florida kind of folks. I just don't think it was sustainable, and I think it's manipulated at times. But like even in my local area now, eggs, which used to be $1 and some change before COVID, which initially went up to like $4 or $5 for a dozen, went back down to like $2 a dozen, and now they're kind of back up to whatever it was, probably like $3.75, $3.80 for a dozen eggs now, and it's just kind of steadily rising more and more. Milk goes up a little here and there, meat goes up a little bit here and there, and it's kind of all just a part of the game where as time goes on, things slowly just kind of nip back at you more and more and more, just take a little off the edge. So that's kind of that 2024 recap. Let's talk about ECT for 2025. Some of you guys might have saw on the ECT Instagram page that we released the first episode of the Minuteman Classroom on YouTube, which this is very honestly in its title. Yeah, it's a classroom style approach to various kind of tactical and Minuteman organizational response group related topics. And the idea behind it was to bring a shorter form of content to you guys on stuff that is more basic, that folks can use to essentially hand out like homework and learn these classroom style environments, a style of learning without actually wasting classroom time and being able to train more in the field. I know as well as most, being so involved in my training with my community guys, that time is very, very limited. And if you're burning several hours in the classroom every other month or whatever, trying to hit down some basics, you lose out on a lot of time in the field. So whether it's catching up new guys to your organization, handing out homework, or just trying to cover things from a classroom perspective, this is basically a free resource. Very basic, nothing super cool guy high speed, but just something to give to your guys to learn in their own time. And then second to that is going to be kind of our Motorola series. It hasn't been titled properly yet, but it's basically going to be a series on the XTS 5000 and the XTL 5000, and then of course it's 2500 series counterparts. But more features over the radios itself, how to utilize the CPS and program the radios and design comms plans. And it'll kind of be like the Minuteman Classroom, where it's like a video or two a month, hopefully, where it's just giving you little bits of information to kind of study from home. And then I see a bunch of kind of just product reviews or interactions with other companies that are doing great stuff. I've been working with Armor Lock recently on the XTL Manpack, and we actually just used it for its first field test this past weekend. I don't want to let out too much yet, but Armor Lock makes a Manpack system for the XTL and has kind of figured out the speaker audio issue that I was unable to fix myself when we first kind of started talking about the Manpack, the P25 Manpack for these, community response style groups. He's found some solutions for that. So sometime probably probably February, there will be an initial video out on a lot of that. I am going to Winter Forge here in a couple weeks. So January is pretty tight for me as it is already. It's already, this is being recorded on January 7th, released on January 8th. So we're already kind of almost a third of the way through the month, and I still got a week straight where I'm going to be out of action at Winter Forge training with SNS Training Solutions. So a lot to come on that. I'm hoping to, get a video or two out a month on the YouTube channel, plus, get back to doing a podcast a month. I need to develop a bit of a kind of guest lineup to come in and talk about some different stuff. Another big thing for 2025 that's seemingly already on the radar is pandemics. Louisiana just, I think a day or two ago, had its first H5N1 bird flu human case death, first one ever. That's not good. COVID's ramping back up again. And then there's this, not necessarily new disease, but kind of more new on the scale of that what it's at right now. It's called the human human metapneumonia virus, HMPV. China has already started lockdowns in their country about it. They kind of blew the whistle on it a few weeks ago. Schools are closed down. China is dealing with a lot of kind of pandemic issues right now, and it's kind of already starting to get outside of its borders. I remember probably 2 months ago at this point, I was watching this doctor/scientist kind of guy on social media, and he was talking about how by the end of January here in the U.S., we would start having more severe issues leading towards pandemics. And he didn't really go into detail about whether it was, purposeful or not because of a Trump presidency or anything like that, but he's just like, this is what's happening behind the scenes around the world. This is the clouds that are forming, few months from now. And then as we get into 2025, he predicts that pandemics will be, another pandemic issue will arise. Will it really? Not entirely sure yet, but we'll see on that. Definitely something to keep your eye out for from the preparedness perspective as far as more lockdowns as it goes. We can say we're not going to lock down as individuals as much as we want, but if your grocery store up the street closes down or limits entry and you can't get supplies that you need for your family, how are you preparing for that? It's one thing to comply with, pandemic shutdown, events. Yeah. I'm not going to lock myself in my house. I'm not going to stop going to church, so on, blah, blah, blah. But if the grocery store shuts down or whatever, you got issues. And then leading into the economy. I am not, an economist by trade by any means. However, I think everybody kind of knows that the U.S. is overdue for a depression-style event. It was kind of expected for it to happen in the late end of 2024, and whether it was the powers to be or not, it's kind of pushed itself off a little bit, but it's teetering right there on the edge. We saw a lot of kind of mid-tier level banks close in 2024. And this is stuff that's not talked about a lot. Not to mention that the true customer inflation rate is very high. The real estate market is kind of iffy. Interest rates came down a little bit, but not quite enough because prices didn't come down either. There really hasn't been much of a correction from these uber crazy highs we saw following COVID. All these people that bought houses at non-inflated rates at 2.5, 3% that will never sell again. Inventory is very limited. Rates are a little high compared to what we were used to after COVID, and prices are up. And building is no cheaper by any means. So that kind of part is an issue. The world economy as a whole is not doing well. Take away the whole BRICS thing for a minute, because everybody always talks about the BRICS currency. If you look at the Chinese, I believe it's the yuan, their kind of equivalent of their national dollar, India's national dollar, you look at many other kind of large economic powers' currency, it's not doing well right now. And China's on the brink of its own 2008 as it is because it screwed up its real estate market so bad. So our economics as a whole is not doing well. Then you throw in, Yemen shutting down the pass through the Middle East and screwing up shipping and sending everything down around Africa, and several wars and politics, and Trump coming in and yelling about tariffs and so on and so forth. I don't think Trump is going to be good for the economy in the short term. I think he might be in the long term. But he's come in pretty aggressive talking about tariffs and changes to economic policy and being really, really harsh against, people that are not the U.S., which, again, usually throughout history is good in the long run. However, playing this game built on top of $36 trillion of debt with no plan on how to tackle it leads for short-term disaster. And I think that's why kind of the foresight has been changed to some sort of economic downturn in 2025. Again, a decade from now, things might be better economically because of these actions, but there's going to be some growing pains here at first. Not to mention that Trump, through his first presidency, was definitely no stranger to adding to the debt. He added, several $1 trillion of debt to the national deficit in his 4 years, and then Biden came in and made it even worse. So there is that, and they're not going to stop spending money. They spend more money than they've ever had, and it doesn't stop. So unfortunately, the best thing that we can do is, ensure that we are living, relatively within our means, making good financial decisions, not taking on a ton of debt. Not taking on any debt at all is very hard for the majority of people to do in modern society. There are some people that are very, very, very good with managing their money and have detailed plans that they stick to, and it works out for them. But that's not the truth for everybody. Even I myself, sitting here right now, am not debt-free, even outside of my mortgage. So it would be an absolute hypocrite to sit here and say that I am debt-free and so on and so forth. Great with managing money, but sometimes things you do in your past kind of haunt you for a while. You kind of got to dig yourself out of a hole. But it's important that you recognize that and work your way out of it. It's kind of one of those things at this point where it's like, if you don't have the proper preps in line, unfortunately, you're going to pay to dig yourself out of that hole, which, hurts a little bit. But a lot of people are coming around to, just food on the shelf and extra first aid kits is not preparedness. There's so much more to it. And if you're not able to do it, over time, then, it'll really, really kind of sneak up on you in the end. So, anyway, kind of moving along in 2025, I've kind of got a list here of the top 5 global flashpoints for 2025 that I think will cause a greater scale of issues in no particular order or threat to the USA. These are just my 5 kind of flashpoints I foresee in 2025. The first one being Russia-Ukraine. This is not just because of the ground war in Russia and Ukraine, but it's everything else that is involved with it. If you look at the country of Georgia, it is in its own political turmoil right now between the presidential election and the kind of pro-Western youth kind of colored revolution that's going on that's similar to, 2014 Ukraine, and the kind of other side of the house that's very, pro-Russia. And then you've got Moldova and Transnistria, I believe it's called. Transnistria. You guys know what I'm talking about. They've kind of got, Moldova's kind of got a breakaway portion of Moldova that is very pro-Russian. There's all these kind of little mini, social and political conflicts going on in and around the actual war in Ukraine and Russia. And of course, the U.S. cannot mind its own business. We've got our fingers in every single pot over there. I don't know how much more Ukraine's got left in the pot. Russia has damn near an infinite supply of manpower, and Ukraine does not. You can have as much weapons as you like, but if you don't have, actual guys to hold territory on the ground and operate these weapon systems and man defenses and so on and so forth, then it's not going to matter. Everybody knew from the get-go that Ukraine was not going to win this war. At least I think everybody knew that. I think Ukraine's done a better job than most people thought that they would. However, most people at plain face value do not realize this is not a Russia versus Ukraine conflict. This is a Ukraine plus thousands and thousands and thousands of, volunteers on the ground, plus whatever secret intelligence agency and special forces from the western side of the world is helping the Ukrainian armed forces, plus the intelligence agencies of, 15 European and North American countries and dozens of satellites and just billions and billions of dollars and billions of rounds of ammunition and billions of dollars worth of equipment. Like, this is not a Ukraine versus Russia. This is Russia versus Ukraine and everything but the direct armed forces of 20 other countries. Now, Russia's getting help from Iran and North Korea and China, but, they are not the equivalents, especially in technology, that on the same playing field that Ukraine is getting. However, I will say that Russia's employment of cheap Iranian drones to deplete, Ukrainian defense munitions, air defense munitions, has been something we've already seen copied in conflicts throughout the world, both against Israel with a lot of the Hamas, Hezbollah, axis of power kind of actors in the Middle East against the Iron Dome and other defense systems there, but also against the U.S. Navy off the coast of Yemen. Yemen has thrown tons of cheap anti-ship missiles and drones and all this kind of stuff at the U.S. Navy to, at one point throughout the summer, they had to remove a large portion of the U.S. naval fleet in that area kind of out of those near Yemenese waters because, the defensive munitions were starting to run dry. So it's crazy to see the advancements and the changes in warfare through the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, I don't think Ukraine's got a whole lot left in the tank, and I think once the dominoes really start to fall, they fall fast, unless, the Western powers start to get involved. So we'll see what goes on with that, but I have a feeling that is a conflict just any day waiting to expand, especially with, countries like Georgia and Moldova and all of them that are having internal conflicts of, Russia versus NATO, political ideologies. Secondly is the Middle East, which is a giant mix of problems. Obviously, you have Israel invading and bombing every single neighbor that they have constantly. But you had the fall of Syria and the Assad regime, which laid way for HTS to take control predominantly in Turkey, and then kind of secondarily to the Syrian National Army backed by Turkey, and then the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are predominantly Kurds and backed by the U.S. and some other Western powers. So Syria is a giant power vacuum that hasn't quite figured itself out yet, and I personally don't trust HTS. For those that don't know, HTS was a former kind of branch or wing of Al-Qaeda throughout the Middle East. And they kind of did some reshaping and some remodeling to where it On the outside, it doesn't appear like there's much of an Islamic extremist organization, but I think at its core it still is. The U.S. removed their leader from the kind of wanted list and removed the designation of HTS as a terrorist organization from the Department of State's standards. But a lot of the videos that have come out of Syria since the Assad regime has fallen has shown some pretty significant crimes against Christians and some other ethnic minorities throughout Syria by HTS troops. Even though that at the top level, their political figures are playing nice with the world, on the ground it is not the same. Plus, we have a huge unsolved and really big head scratcher issue when it comes to Iran. Iran has essentially watched every single ally it has in the region just fall one by one to some degree, and really hasn't done a whole lot about it. And then you have Yemen just freeballing down there, doing whatever it wants all of the time. And no matter how many times we bomb the absolute shit out of them, they just seem to, really not care to any extent. And they are really holding their ground well, kind of in the Red Sea / Arabian Sea kind of area. The Strait of Hormuz is pretty firmly under their control for the most part. So there's a whole lot of issues going on in the Middle East that I think can be a flashpoint for, a more globally involved conflict. And that's without even getting into the whole Taliban issue, and especially with their neighbors with Pakistan. Moving along to kind of China-Taiwan at number 3. There's always a big question as to when is China actually going to invade Taiwan. The question is not if, the question is when. I remember kind of before COVID being in the Marine Corps, and people always talked about how by 2030 we would be at war with China. These big Defense Department people and these political strategists and all this kind of stuff. 2030 we'll be at war with China. And then by the time we got to just around COVID, people were like, by 2028 we'll be at war with China. And then it kind of just kept moving up further and further until I'd say like 2023, beginning of 2023, they were like, 2025, 2026, we're going to be at war with China. And now it's January 2025, and it's like, oh, we're here now. And S2 Underground talks about it a lot. China's drills around Taiwan are so intense and so big all the time that it would be really hard to actually tell when China is going to invade Taiwan. And I don't need to explain to everybody why China invading Taiwan creates a giant issue for the world. The problem with China and Taiwan, and it kind of goes on to point number 5 about internal U.S. conflicts to some degree, is that I have a lot of concern about China's involvement within U.S. borders right now. With the amount of drone activity that we have going on right now, is it all China? No. Is a lot of it China? Yes. Are there thousands, if not millions, of Chinese militant and intelligence operatives hiding throughout the United States? Absolutely. We all know that. We all remember the stories about the Chinese secret police stations and, groups of what appear to be Asian men training in the woods and, all of this kind of stuff. The southern border has been so unsecured for so long that we have no idea what's here. And I think China has a really big ability to strike us here at the homeland, and that's without going down the cyber rabbit hole. I'm sure we could probably do it too, but I think China could probably shut everything down tomorrow if they really wanted to, and we'd be left pretty screwed. And that's before any type of drone attacks, guerrilla-style attacks from, PLA insurgents, whatever it might be. So, China-Taiwan, not good. Coming in at number 4, South Korea and North Korea, and really I want to highlight more on South Korea. Anybody that's paid attention over the last month or so has saw that there was a kind of half-assed martial law / military style coup against the South Korean government by order of the South Korean president. And when we look back at why that occurred, essentially President Yoon of South Korea stated that the majority of the political factions in South Korea have become too soft on North Korea and China as a growing threat in the region, and were slowly rolling out communism in South Korea, and he was doing it to save the republic, and so on and so forth. Well, after a few hours of some coup-like activity, the martial law was lifted almost unanimously by, the kind of equivalents of the congressional South Korean government. And then now we're in this really weird middle ground where, they want to impeach the president, then they don't, then they do, and then they want to arrest him, and then they don't, and then they do. And, we just got over this point a couple days ago at this point where, the police went to President Yoon's, presidential home, the palace, or whatever it is referred to as, to arrest President Yoon on treason charges and so on and so forth that, kind of the more left-wing political parties of South Korea drew up. Well, when they got there, the 55th Infantry Division of the South Korean military, which is the Presidential Guard, blocked the police from entering the palace, and then a bunch of pro and anti-President Yoon protesters showed up. A military soldier got into a fist fight with a police officer. And eventually, the arrest warrant expired because there wasn't enough police to overcome the military power around the president, and they also didn't want to fight necessarily, guys that they see that's on their own side. So now we're kind of back to this weird wait and see style, events. And North Korea is watching. North Korea is moving stuff around the DMZ. It's no telling what will happen. And then we have, I think as a global flashpoint, internal U.S. low-intensity conflicts. And I'm going to dive into this a little bit more in here in a second. But I think this is true for really all of the Western powers. Us, the UK, Germany. A lot of these countries that have been so soft on immigration and social policies and whatnot for so far that we've destroyed our own country internally, especially if you look at the UK. I mean, at one point, they were arresting people for, almost anything, making posts on social media and whatnot. And this was all while, Arabic-style migrants were raping English women and jumping people and burning things down and crime and it was craziness. But if you got on Facebook and made a comment about how bad it's getting around there, or talking about how they need to stop importing so many third world migrants, the police would come and lock you up. Germany's the same way. The younger generation and this new kind of AfD party and so on and so forth, they're kind of tired of the liberal bullshit, but the government is just cracking down hard on them. And then diving into the internal U.S. kind of conflict of it all, I see three major issues. Obviously, one being Islamic terrorism. Everybody's heard the Sarah Adams, Sean Ryan episodes probably at this point. If you have not, you should watch them. With the fall of Afghanistan, the re-rise of the Taliban, and generally speaking, an unchecked Iran on the global scale, even though they're getting kind of checked on the regional scale, and the kind of ISIS getting its footing again globally, there is a lot of risk right now for some major attacks. And if you think China and these Islamic groups that hate the United States are not doing business together behind closed doors, you are very, very wrong. Very, very wrong. So Islamic terrorism, I think, is kind of at the number one spot as far as internal U.S. conflict goes. That's a rabbit hole, guys. We'll avoid that. The second one is somewhat of a socialist uprising, or a kind of change in socialist behavior in the U.S. For those that don't know, socialism and communist movements in the United States are very, very big, and they're very different than they were in 2020. We've gone from kind of a anarchist, communist belief system where everyone and anyone was in it all of the time, to now, through 2024 and now even into 2025, you don't really see as much of the anarchist political, protesters out and about all the time. These liberal style protests are not drawing thousands of people for several days, if not weeks in a row, to just tear up everything. And there's been a lot of talk about kind of the reshaping and reforming of the socialist and communist movement in America. And there are tons of organizations, well organized and very well spoken organizations throughout a lot of these larger cities throughout the United States and even in suburban areas, where I think you'll start to see, especially as the Trump presidency goes on, a more low intensity but guerrilla style socialist presence in the United States. And what I mean by that is less mass protests and riots and anarchy, and more into smaller, more dangerous, more violent protests that specifically target individuals or branches of government. I see attacks on infrastructure growing, and I see them kind of moving towards a more truly guerrilla presence in the United States, especially in their action. I think the potential is there if the right social event occurs for a large-scale political demonstration to kind of take place again, like we saw in 2020. But I don't see it happening as much. However, that could change depending on what the economy does, and if it does change, it's not because of the socialist movement, but it's more about the crime movement from a lot of the more, I would say, socially acceptable areas of the United States, especially where kind of these migrant communities have been built up, where they've just flooded them with third world migrants from who knows where crime is just rampant. Economic issues, just like we saw in 2020, promote destabilization and those types of issues. And then lastly is the cartel activity. I think the cartel is definitely one of the bigger threats to the U.S. and just the U.S. population as a whole. Because if you look south of the border, the cartel does not mess around. They will whack judges. They fight the Mexican military. They shoot, military aircrafts down. They ambush police forces. Like, they don't really care. And I think if the Trump administration comes in, and I'm not saying that we should not be dealing with the cartel in a very aggressive manner, but if we go at them very aggressively and we disrupt their business very fast, you will see retaliation and you will see a change in their standard operating procedures, which, again, I think is one of those growing pains where it's like you have to get rid of this problem, but unfortunately it's going to be a little messy until it's all cleaned up. There's no soft way to remove the cartel and other cartel-like activities. Like, it's just, you got to rip that Band-Aid off, and it's going to hurt for a second, but, in the end, it'll be fine. And I think as a whole, we really, really need to focus on being the prepared and responsive citizen. I've said it 1,000 times. Don't listen to people on the internet that say you should never respond to active shooter events. You shouldn't get involved with, people having, troubles, especially medically, because it's not your problem and there's liability and all of that. Screw that. That is not the moral society that I want to live in. I want to live in a society where, good, well-driven, principled men shoot terrorists in the face and society says thank you. So I see that as a big issue moving forward. But I think with guys that are fit, that are well trained, that are prepared, and that are morally driven, we'll get out of this just fine. But there's going to be lots of growing pains to come with all of this in 2025. Things will get worse before they get better. That's not a doomer attitude. That is a reality that everyone needs to learn to accept. Things will get worse before they get better. However, eventually things do get better. And if things never get better again, then it's the end, and it really doesn't matter at that point. We all get to go meet our maker. However, things will get worse before they get better. The economy will get worse. We're $36 trillion in debt with an inflated stock market and an unrealistic kind of economic policy across the world. Economics will get worse. We're on the brink of like 8 major military conflicts around the world, with dozens of small ones already going on. Things will get worse before they get better. Political tensions in the U.S. are very, very high, with a lot of players with their hand in the pot. Things will get worse before they get better. However, in the end, all you can do is what you think is right. That's really all I got for you guys. Appreciate you guys sticking through if you made it all the way to the end of this kind of rant. 49 minutes. That's not too shabby. Really didn't dive into the January 1st terrorist attacks or terror attack and other strange event. That is a whole rabbit hole that I'm probably going to have to tackle at a different time. But it goes to show you, 2025 is set to be a really weird time, guys. Get your preps in order, get your community in order, get your friends in order, so on and so forth, because 2025 is coming, and when it finally hits us, woo-wee, it is going to hurt. So, that's all I've got for you guys. As always, train hard, train often.
Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours.